All right, folks. So, welcome back. We're going to talk about small groups and formal organizations today. We're going to get to that point, but the first thing that I want to do as we get started here is I want to talk about where do organizations come from. And to do that, I'm bringing you back to this look at culture. So, before we get into small groups and formal organizations in society and their relevance to individuals and the functioning of society, let's ask the question, where do organizations come from? And hopefully by addressing this question, it'll help you better appreciate secondary groups and organizations. So oftentimes when we start talking about organizations, I ask students, what comes to mind when you think about organizations? A lot of times students will say bureaucracy, red tape. You got to jump through hoops to get things done, and that's accurate. Organizations do have a lot of policies and rules and et cetera, right? But they are critically important for the functioning of society. But the question again is, how do we get there? Where do organizations come from? So if you go back and look, at these early hunting and gathering societies, there certainly were no organizations then. Everything that got done was done within small groups, usually family groups or a small village. We talk about hunters and gatherers being nomadic, going from place to place. Everything they got done by their work themselves. Okay, there wasn't, you don't go to Kroger to get your groceries, and you don't go to a place of work to make money to go to Kroger. You don't have organizations. So where do they come from, and why do we have organizations? This is a very central question in the field of sociology. And so society, the organization of society can be traced back to the realization that organizations can help us get our work done. Now, organizations in and of themselves don't get work done for people because people work in the organizations. But our modern day society, really particularly since the agricultural revolution, really put a lot of importance on organizations to help get things done, but also organizations keep society together over time. So for example, let me switch to the next slide here. Remember, social groups are not just in real life, but virtual, right? Let's get to this slide here looking at small groups and formal organizations. So sometimes I use this example, and it's a more appropriate example in this past year than any time before. But if OCTC doesn't have the capacity to change the functioning of their organization, and if teachers, everybody that are in that organization, if teachers can't adapt, and we're not allowed to get together physically, then how do we, have school? How do we have classes? And so you can take for granted sometimes the importance of organization to help keep things going. Now, some organizations can adapt to abrupt changes better than other organizations, right? Sometimes it's hard for an organization to change how they do things. Usually it takes time, because organizations are big, they have a lot of policies, a lot of rules, and they have to change. Now, we used to do things, not just back in hunting and gathering societies, but even in smaller communities, you can still see examples of this. We do things, we don't do things differently than we did maybe 30 years ago because the wheel's not broke. So why try to fix the wheel if the wheel's not broke? Well, part of the problem with that way of thinking is you could get in the rut of doing things the way that you've always done things, and it may not be working, and you may not know it. I see this a lot in smaller communities and mid-sized communities where organizations do things the way that they've always done them, and they're not meeting the needs of the people that they serve. Right? So you think here in 2021, especially over the last 10 to 15 years, how have organizations had to change to meet the need of an online, behavior, or meeting people where they are online for engagement and connection, and how many organizations are reluctant to make that change. So, when society changes, when individuals change, organizations, groups that link individuals together with one another into society at large, those organizations have to change as well. And so we're going to look at here some different characteristics and dynamics of small groups in formal organizations. So again, small groups here are going to be those primary and secondary groups, right? Here are the various characteristics. Look at this, norms. We've talked about that quite a bit. Usually the norms in small groups are very general, like in the norms of a friendship group. You kind of know how you're supposed to be treated, and that's an important thing. It's how you sustain relationships in a small group. You treat people a certain way. You make that, you nurture that relationship. You nurture that connection. But in an organization, the norms are pretty much policy. So there may be norms in the classroom about how you're supposed to act and what you're supposed to do, but there's also rules and policies that govern how people in various positions in the organization are supposed to act. So we talked about status, social position that you occupy. Well, in terms of being an employee in a workplace, that position that you occupy is largely defined by the job description and the rules and the regulations of the organization. Whether you're an employee, whether you're a student, whatever organization that you're in, even in large-scale religion, there are written policies as to how you're supposed to be a Baptist or a Catholic or Methodist or whatever. So any organization you have is going to have structure. And in order to fit into that organization, you have to do these kinds of things here. You have to meet membership criteria. And what do we mean by that? So, okay, here's another example. If I decide to quit my job, what is the community college going to do in order to replace me? Well, they're going to find people that have the qualifications. You have to have a certain amount of education to teach sociology, just like you do biology or anything else, right? You can't just put anybody in that position in the organization. There are certain requirements. And there's so much attention given to those kinds of things. It's not just within our college, but where we get funding from, or we're a public institution. The state of Kentucky might have guidelines that we also have to be mindful of. So you think about being embedded in networks, right? Connection and relationships. When you think about organizations, sometimes it's not just about being embedded in one organization. That organization may be embedded in multiple networks outside of it. And to the extent that that organization is connected to large other organizations and larger networks, you start to see how society functions. We need as individuals the connection with loved ones and close friends, emotional fulfillment. But it's formal organizations that keep society functioning. After you and I are gone from this world, will the world cease to exist? No, it'll keep going. How is that the case? How will the community college keep going if I'm not there? Well, they'll hire somebody else. And the same thing can be said about everything that you think of, every position that you occupy. Now, family and friends, miss us and, that sort of thing. But society keeps going. How does society keep going? How is society stable? That's the importance of formal organization, especially modern society, the importance of organization. So this idea about where do organizations come from and how have organizations become important over time is a really critical question to explore and to better understand in the field of sociology. There's been a lot of work done on this, and your book talks a little bit about it. You talk about Max Weber, the rationalization of society. And we're thinking more broadly again about where do organizations come from and their importance in our society. So rationalization, Tradition makes a society conservative by limiting productive efficiency and ability to change. Okay, so we're going to get into the difference between doing things the old way and doing things more modern. And we call that the rationalization of society. Tradition versus rationality, right? So now within organizations, if we do things in organizations and they don't work, we know that if we don't change, because society is rapidly changing, if the organization doesn't change, it's going to have problems. Well, how does it change? What is its focus? Its focus is not necessarily on relationships that people have with one another. So take a family business. If you've ever worked with family members, you know that it's a tough situation because you've got the relationship with your family members and you want to maintain that. But you also have a working relationship. What's more important for a small business? The relationships of family members or the relationships that people have in terms of getting work done to make the business function? That can sometimes be a delicate situation. Organizations are focused on being productive. What's the purpose of organizations in society? In particular, what's the purpose of a restaurant? And I'm gonna lead you to something here in just a second, but what is the purpose of an educational institution? Is the purpose of educational institutions to help people learn? Yeah. Do we also have to keep our doors open by making money? Yeah, we do. What's the purpose of where you work? Usually the business is about making money. So it's not just about the people that are a part of that organization. What's the purpose of the organization? And that gets us into thinking that, modern society becomes a little bit disenchanted as sentimental ties give way to focus on process, on bureaucracy. Sometimes we call this sacred versus secular. That societies of old, hunters and gatherers, they were more kind of sacred, and those close ties that people have with one another. Shoot, you could even think about modern society. To what extent does work get in the way of family? To what extent does your job get in the way of close relationships that you want to have with your friends? That is a balance that young adults have to learn, right? Marriages are not just about loving one another. You also got to feed the family. You got to keep the heat on. And sometimes you have to work, and work gets in the way of relationships. Finances can get in the way of marriages. So this idea of primary groups are really, valuable to us, are important. And then secondary groups are important too because they start to make society function. That's the modern world that we live in, okay? This rationalization of society. Yeah, close relationships are really important for a variety of reasons. Whether it's socialization, whether it's maintaining your emotional and mental well-being, they're important. But we also have to balance the needs of the modern world. And that might be work and career. Many of you might be going to school because of that. Not just because you want to learn, but because you recognize in the modern world you have to have an education, and that is generally provided through formal organizations and schools. Right? Okay. Now, the next thing I'm going to introduce here to you, we're not going to go over bureaucracy right now, but I want to talk a little bit about this idea, this concept of McDonaldization of society. And that may sound a little bit weird to you, but it's an interesting take on the modern organization. Now, before we cover some of this, let me tell you, this is not about anybody that works at McDonald's. It's not about any one person that works in any restaurant. It's about the organizational model. And the reason why this particular model is interesting is because if you think about it, McDonald's is one of the most successful organizations in human history. Now, maybe their cheeseburgers aren't all that great, but as an organization, what's the purpose of an organization? It's not just providing the best food in this case, it's making money. Well, what do you do if you see somebody doing doing something successful? What have organizations around the world done? They see the success of McDonald's. Why create a whole new organizational model if McDonald's has been so successful? Well, now let's be mindful of something. What does success mean? And that's an interesting thing to think about. So the organizational success might, in this case, might also equal people having poor health associated with eating McDonald's. Well, you may say you don't have to eat McDonald's, but you also start thinking about how this organizational model has not only been replicated across organizations in society, but you get to the point where so many organizations adopt these kinds of practices that we have a society that is McDonaldized. So it's not just about McDonald's itself; it's about how that process has been adopted by many organizations, not just fast food. Walmart, Lowe's, Target, any form of organization, you can see these principles at play. So what are the principles? Efficiency. Get it done quickly, right? So you go through McDonald's and, you may have done a lot of takeout food. My family has done a lot of fast food and takeout food orders in the last year because we don't want to cook every single meal that we do. But think about how efficient it is just to drive through McDonald's or any other restaurant, have them cook your food for you, bag it, give it to you. You order it and you're out of there in under 4 minutes, under 3 minutes maybe in some cases, right? It's very efficient. And not only do you not have to cook at home, but you also don't have to sit around the table and look at one another when you eat. What do I mean by that? So there's pros of the McDonaldization of society being more efficient, but that may not always be good for everything. So in our process of being efficient, what has suffered as a result? Think about how communication has been McDonaldized, right? It's efficient, quick and easy to text somebody, but is that better? Or should we talk to them face to face? Well, what if you can't talk to them face to face? So, technology is good, but there's drawbacks to it as well. And these are the kinds of questions that we examine in the field. How does these principles of efficiency, predictability, uniformity, control, they may be good for an organization to be successful, but organizations, do they serve society to some extent? What kind of organizations do we want in society? Are organizations, do they address the needs of their employees? One reason why McDonald's has these things in place is that they can reduce the number of people that work there because it's all automated. Well, so efficiency and these other principles are not always good. We have to kind of evaluate that, think about that. What kind of society do we want, right? So predictability, the use of set formulas. Your book talks more about this, and I really would encourage you to go read about it. There's a reason why McDonald's hamburger tastes the same in another city. It's the same food. It's not a chef. It's made the same way. It comes from the same place. It's manufactured food. It's manufactured taste is what it is. Uniformity, control. Look at the last one. Humans are the most unreliable factor in a restaurant. Maybe humans are the most unreliable factor in most organizations. You think about humans, we have good days, we have bad days, and if you can, eliminate or reduce the impact of that on the functioning of the organization, then the organization might function better if it doesn't have to always deal with humans. Now think about moving into the future. What do jobs of the future look like? Are we hell bent on having advanced technology? What are the roles of humans going to be in society? Are organizations going to, become what's more important than humans? That's an interesting thing to think about. Okay. All right, so we're going to stop right there and end chapter, what is it, chapter number? Chapter 6, Groups and Organizations. And hope you got something out of that, and I'll see you again soon.